Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. We are going to get into something a little bit different today. We're going to do Sabaton Inmate 4859, the song and the Sabaton history. This has been one of the songs that has been most highly recommended to look at from Sabaton since I started looking at their music. So I'm anxious to get into it. Tomorrow I will continue with the Great Northern War series. I think we're on part 3, but I wanted to get into something a little bit different today. So with all that being said, let's get into it. Sabaton Inmate 4859. God, the song sounds like super dark already. I don't know, there's like a gritty darkness to the way it sounds.
The dawn of century, a body born violate, resettled from Karelia's plains. Go to a man in exile as the Great War came. Unleash the shadow on his world. Whoa, no. Whoa, no. Who knows his name? Inmate in hell or a hero in prison, soldier in Auschwitz, who knows his name? Locked in a cell, waging war from the prison, hiding in Auschwitz, who hides behind 4859.
Okay, so I don't know the story behind this. That's why I wanted to do, because I had been given, basically what I had been told about it was that it was a super crazy story, right? But that specifically, I guess that was the chorus, waging war from the prison, hiding behind the, like, God, I'm trying to think of how that could work. Nobody went to a concentration camp purposely, did they? Like, surely that's, I don't know. Let's keep going.
Outside of Nethergate, decided to break free. At the end of April 43, joined the uprising fight on the streets while hiding his rent. Takes commando while serving his country in need. Whoa, no. Whoa, no. Who knows his name? Inmate in hell or a hero in prison, soldier in Auschwitz, who knows his name? Locked in a cell, waging war from the prison, hiding in Auschwitz, who hides behind 4859.
See, it's the hiding in Auschwitz part that's throwing me off. Because the rest of it sounds like he could have been captured and just put in Auschwitz. But hiding in Auschwitz is what is throwing me for a loop there. I'm trying so hard. The wheels in my brain are going so fast right now, trying to figure out what this is. That's weird. That almost went into like a national anthem sounding thing right there. Okay, so that was Sabaton's Inmate 4859. I really liked that song. It was certainly one of the more darker sounds that I've heard from them so far, but I really liked it. I'm split in like 4 different directions on what this could possibly be about. Like I think I have the general idea, but the specifics I'm all turned around on. So I'm going to go ahead and start the Sabaton history for it. I will see you guys over there in just a second. Okay, here we go. Sabaton history for Inmate 4859. Let's get into it.
The story of Witold Pilecki is one of the great 20th century stories of bravery and sacrifice.
And our song Inmate 4859 is about the brave man Witold Pilecki.
The story of Witold Pilecki is as tragic as it is heroic, and it is one for the ages. He was born
Dang, he looks young.
in the Russian Empire near the Finnish border in 1901, spent his youth as part of the nationalistic Polish Pathfinders, and fought in independent Poland's new army against the Soviets in the Polish-Soviet War. He lived a peaceful life for much of the interwar years, but eventually returned to the Army Reserve, and in 1939 was mobilized against the German invasion. Pilecki's Ulan regiment was shattered by the advancing Wehrmacht, but he joined other Polish stragglers and kept fighting until the fall of Warsaw. In late October, he disappeared into the underground, where he joined the resistance movement of the Tajna Armia Polska, an arm of the Armia Krajowa, the Polish Home Army. Now, one of their tasks was to get inside knowledge about German prisoner of war camps, and one camp in particular, in the small town of Auschwitz in German, where many Poles simply disappeared. It was suspected that they were sent to Germany as forced labor, but no one knew for sure. Pilecki came up with a dangerous plan. He would personally infiltrate Auschwitz, uncover the truth, and organize...
What? I did not know that this was done. I did not know that Auschwitz was, by anybody, like, infiltrated, that anybody went purposefully. And when you think about it, the idea that they were being sent to Germany as forced labor, like, I guess lucky ones were used for labor. Like, maybe this is even more of a dangerous situation than he understands when going into it. That blows my mind that somebody would be willing to do that.
Resistance in the camp. On September 19th, 1940, using the alias Tomasz Serafiński, he intentionally walked into a German security sweep on the streets of Warsaw. SS men seized him, and the next day he was herded alongside other Poles into trucks at the Warsaw train station. All day they drove east. The men pressed together without food or water. Now, the rest of this story is told directly from the source material, from Pilecki's personal report about his experiences in the camp. It is not pretty. Arriving at the camp, Pilecki and the crowd of men were driven forward by brutal beatings from the guards. Some men were pulled out of the group at random, unprovoked, and shot in the head to break any thoughts of resistance. Accompanied by the laughter of the guards, they were then pushed on past the barbed wire and towards the parade ground, where a group of men in striped clothes was waiting for them. These men jumped the newcomers with fists and clubs. Some were actually beaten to death. The men in the striped clothes then asked them questions about their backgrounds and their jobs. And those who said academics or doctors were knocked to the ground. With boots kicking against their heads, their murderers proclaimed that this is the concentration camp Auschwitz, my good man. His head shaved, Pilecki hurried out of the bathhouse, though a guardsman knocked out 2 of his front teeth because he did not hold the sign with his prison number between them. From now on, Pilecki was neither himself nor Tomasz, but a number, prisoner 4859. In his paper-thin blue and white striped uniform and a pair of ill-fitting wooden shoes, he found himself once again on the parade ground. There, he encountered the murderous men again. They were called kapos, prisoner functionaries. Often German or Polish criminals, they were tasked with, let's say, keeping things in line.
Yeah, that is one of the more brutal things about the concentration camps, was this idea that, like, you specifically went and found shitty individuals who would do well or do really poorly in a position of power and put them in a position of power over the prisoners in the camp. Like, that is one of the more just, like, sadistically brutal parts of this whole thing.
Inside the camp, since the regular SS men lived in barracks outside, right? Most of the capos were violent sadists who enjoyed brutally beating and torturing the helpless prisoners. Wearing yellow armbands with the capo label, they also oversaw the labor companies, to one of which Pilecki was assigned. In that labor company, it became clear that Auschwitz aimed to first exterminate the Polish intelligentsia. Prisoners with academic backgrounds who were not used to demanding physical work or who lacked the experience or the dexterity to work in the quarries were mercilessly beaten to death by the capos. Being too exhausted to lift another brick or to push a wheelbarrow was also a death sentence. Every evening, fewer people returned to the main camp. Every walk to the latrines, every trip to the bathhouse was accompanied by beatings and harassment. Those who came late to morning parade or tried to hide away were hunted down, dragged to the parade ground, and either hanged or shot in front of the others.
So there was an experiment done in the U.S. that is very controversial, right? The Stanford prison experiment. And it basically goes into the psychology that humans can you know, because humans are very adaptable. That's one of the kind of interesting things about humans, is how adaptable we are. But with the Stanford prison experiment, what it showed was that if you're put into a situation like this where you have a position of power, you are also very adaptable in the wrong way. Like, you're willing to go further than you know you would have thought possible just because of kind of the situation and the power you have. It's really kind of a dark look into how easily humans can go down a path that is just so dark and so brutal.
Many tried to kill themselves, usually early in the morning before the day of torture began. If anyone tried to escape, the whole block was punished for it, standing out in the open for hours, or doing punishment sports where men too exhausted to lift their arms fell down and died under the boots of the capos. Often, the only time to catch your breath was when they were busy murdering another prisoner. Pilecki's good physical condition saved him from this fate, but for how long could that last? Well, Pilecki set out to build his first resistance cell, a group of 5 men. Later, he would create other 5er groups, but none of them knew of the existence of the others. So in case they were captured and tortured, they could not betray the whole network, right? Those groups would either organize food or clothing, or would help other members to get a job, since it was clear from day one that staying in the worker groups, the labor groups, even well-conditioned men like Pilecki would soon die. So many of those worker prisoners did in fact die that the prisoners had to build the first camp crematorium. Pilecki noted that the camp became one big mill which ground living people to ash. In 1941, as more and more prisoners were brought in, the camp grew. Larger fences were needed, more barbed wire and more guard towers. And as Auschwitz grew, it needed to feed itself. And this opened up jobs for the older prisoners. With careful planning, Pilecki got his 5er groups into the carpenters, the postal service, and the barbers. He eventually got himself a job as a repairman for an oven inside an SS man's house outside the camp. Upon leaving the living hell of Auschwitz, he returned to a world of lavish gardens, laughing children at play, and villagers having normal, everyday conversations with one another. Pilecki felt the questions burning inside him. What was...
Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that you see the reality of what is going on, and then you leave, and it's like nothing is happening? I mean, it's literally like nothing is happening. Like, that would put me into like some sort of either dark depression or like, unabated rage. I feel like I feel like there would be no in between. It would be one or the other there, because what a weird circumstance. And you've got to be thinking, like, what kind of world am I living in where this is happening right here, and then everybody out here is like wondering what they're having for dinner and work, and just like what I don't know, just what a weird circumstance.
Was the real world? What was the real nature of man? What was the culture of the 20th century? Since mankind had advanced so far from the barbarism of old, how is this still possible? Or
I've talked about this a million times. Sorry, then I'll let it run for a little bit, but I've talked about this a bunch. We have this weird thing where as technology progresses, we believe that is humanity's progression. And I would say that history shows us over and over and over again that the progression and evolution is strictly in technology. That evolution is not human in the slightest. Like, we are the same as we have always been. And the technology can make life like softer and easier, and that can give us this kind of facade that the world that we live in is somehow evolved and societies have gotten to a place where this kind of stuff can't happen. But humans are the same. We're the same as we've always been. Let the internet go out for a year or two. Let crops get swept out and there be famine across the world, and see how evolved humans are when the technology fails.
Was this the true face of humanity? Would the whole world look like this if the boundaries of civilization disappeared? Each morning, he and the other prisoners found themselves surprised to be alive. Their bodies thin to the bone, black and blue from the daily beatings, riddled with lice and fleas, living on a starvation diet. Only his daily mantra, "You're not giving up," helped Pilecki keep on and try to inspire others to do the same. Survival was only possible through friendship and mutual help. Loners died quick. Now, up until May 1941, it was possible for ordinary Poles to be released from Auschwitz, mostly by their families paying enormous sums to the Germans. Those released prisoners smuggled Pilecki's notes to the Armia Krajowa, but when the war between Germany and the Soviet Union began, this stopped. Instead, new groups began arriving to the camp. Many were now Jews, and by the end of August, the first Soviet prisoners were transported to Auschwitz. Pilecki reports that one day, 700 officers were tightly packed into a room all day, till finally a group of German soldiers with gas masks on threw gas containers inside. This was the first act of gassing people with hydrogen cyanide at Auschwitz, according to Pilecki. Soon after, though, on his way to work, he passed groups of naked Soviet prisoners waiting to be led into the crematorium, where they were gassed and burned. The capos.
I have read a lot about the gas and the way it was created. Zyklon, right, is what it was called. Zyklon B. Zyklon A was used as a pest extermination, but it had a really bad smell, so that people knew to stay away, because obviously it was extremely poisonous to them too. And with Zyklon B, they just took the smell out of it. Isn't that what it was? It's been a while since I've done any reading on it, but I think that was how the gas was come up with.
Were often brutal savages, but the bestiality of some of the SS guards was even worse. Pilecki tells of guard dogs trained to go for the throats of prisoners, the torture of smashing testicles with a hammer, and many stories far too nightmarish to tell here. Now, with his cells set up in important positions all over the camp, Pilecki was ready to start a revolt, but he needed help from the outside to be successful. The prisoners were thirsty for revenge, and they were ready for anything, since they did not fear death after all they had endured. But even had they managed to overwhelm the guards and take the camp, they would not be able to hold it for long. Pilecki believed that the Armia Krajowa had received at least one of his messages. He had urged them to stage an attack or send in paratroopers from the Free Polish Army over in Britain, or drop a crate of arms onto them, or something. But so far, nothing. Without help from the outside, Pilecki's third Christmas in Auschwitz came and went. And Auschwitz was now changing. There was no longer collective punishment, no outright murder, or even everyday brutality, or at least it was toned down. See, Auschwitz became a factory which would now systematically murder its prisoners instead of individualistic random killing. Not with the batons of the capos, but with phenol and gas. There were 3 crematoriums working simultaneously, able to burn corpses within minutes. By April 1943, more and more of the surviving Poles were sent out of Auschwitz to make room for Jewish prisoners from all over Europe and the Soviet Union. This meant the end of Pilecki's network, as its members were sent to other camps. So after 2 years and 7 months of surviving in Auschwitz, Pilecki decided it was time to break out, since an uprising was no longer possible. He got a night shift job at a bakery outside the camp. Shortly after Easter, as one guard was asleep, he and 2 other men pushed the door open and ran. Shots cracked out behind them, but they ran all night and all day until they reached a small town. With help from patriotic Poles, Pilecki smuggled himself back to Warsaw, where, on August 23, 1943, After nearly 1,000 days in Auschwitz, he met with commanders of the Armia Krajowa, telling them of his experiences.
And I'm sure being like, hey, bastards, like, I've been trying to get people on the outside, I've been trying to get you guys to do anything to help the Poles that are in there dying. And, 3 years later, I escaped because nothing has happened. Like, jeez.
All the death, all the torture, but people hesitated to believe him. It seemed all too unbelievable, even for the hated Germans to do all this killing. They knew it was bad, but not this bad. Pilecki would stay in the underground army and fight in the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. He was later interned in prisoner of war camps, and after liberation in 1945, was assigned to the 2nd Corps of the Polish Army in Italy, where he turned in his report about Auschwitz to the British.
Do you think that people really didn't believe what was happening? Like, I don't know. I've wondered this a lot because there's a lot of ideas and pushback on a bunch of different parts of the war. But one of the things, obviously, is the shock of the soldiers. The Allied soldiers, whenever they saw some of these camps, right? But for the people who lived around there, who were involved and around the Germans all the time, do you think really nobody knew? Or was it like they didn't want to know? Because I wonder this a lot, of like the cognitive dissonance that we have today. And even if something like, like if there was just, well, use this as an example. If all of the Jews of Europe were being rounded up and taken someplace, I feel like I would know deep down that, like, something terrible is happening. And, like, maybe I wouldn't know exactly, but that it's something terrible is happening. And so part of me thinks, like, did people just not want to know? Was it a thing where, like, if it didn't directly affect you, you were willing to turn a blind eye to it, that cognitive dissonance kicked in, and you just kind of shut it out? You guys let me know what you think on that.
For Pilecki, Auschwitz was the symbol of the Polish struggle for existence. He himself could never go back to a normal civilian life after experiencing what you've just heard. He maintained contact with the underground resistance, now against the Soviet Union, after the war, and indeed returned to Poland in late 1945 to report on the Soviet occupation. He lived and worked undercover, but on May the 8th, 1947, the Ministry of Public Security captured him. He was tortured and dragged before a kangaroo court and accused of many things, including espionage and planning an armed uprising. The sentence was death. On May 25th, 1948, in the Mokotów prison in Warsaw, Witold Pilecki was executed. His final resting place remains unknown. In 1990, Pilecki and others from that show trial were rehabilitated, and today he is celebrated, and with good reason, as a Polish patriot and a hero. Now, we cannot even imagine what he went through and what courage it must have taken to do so. It's a pretty heavy story, you know?
Yeah. I gotta be honest, I don't know how many people we researched for the Heroes album, but if there ever was a slam dunk, pardon my language, what the fuck moment, this was it, I would say.
And it is, their sacrifice is one thing, bravery is another thing, but doing all of that, I mean, think of the odds. I mean, getting in and getting out.
Yeah, I'm going to go to Auschwitz on purpose.
And then I'm going to get out on purpose, and doing all that for a cause, and for what is a noble and a just cause, any way you slice it.
Yeah, and I mean, I am so surprised also that how isn't there a major Hollywood blockbuster about this?
That makes no sense at all.
Yeah, and people are coming up with, Hollywood scripts. I mean, I'm not bashing the film industry here. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, people are making scripts that are less fantastic and not true, and still nobody.
And this is a
feels
true
this.
story, and even the tragic ending and stuff. You know,
Yeah.
that's. I mean,
Maybe that's why they're not doing it.
well, they could throw in like a romantic interest or something. They could have Gwyneth Paltrow, maybe. I don't know.
Romance in Auschwitz, great.
I think there is a conscious effort to steer away from the concentration camps. I mean, there are very specific movies, things like Schindler's List, but I think overall there's this attempt to stay away from a subject that's this dark.
Stranger things have happened in Hollywood.
Yes, true.
You know, but that leads you to wonder. I mean, there must have been romantic stories in Auschwitz.
I guess so. I mean, we met a woman called Anna who fought in the Polish resistance
Okay.
during the uprising.
Yeah.
She actually said that, yeah, there was, well, she was flirting with a guy in the middle of, you know, I mean, not as they were shooting, I guess.
Yeah. But I mean, but that's not 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Exactly. So, I mean, she said it's strange how man, or, you know, you can normalize such a extreme situation
For
and
some.
life still goes on. You still go to the toilet, everybody understands that, but you are still actually falling in love while fighting or waging a war, you know? It's weird.
And if this guy could break out, then of course you could break from the men's side to the women's side.
Yeah.
You know, it's nothing. I mean, if there's one thing this all proves is nothing is impossible. Nothing is as impossible as you think. I know, but it is. It's, you know what would, even more than just a Hollywood movie, it'd be a good miniseries.
Yes,
You know?
actually. HBO, do you hear this?
See, if anybody out there's HBO is listening, and Yuki and I will write it. I mean, I'm a writer, and he's good at emotion, so together we could do it.
Yeah, but don't put me in acting in it because I suck as an actor. So
As we've noticed over these months of
Yes.
Sabaton history, ladies and gentlemen. What about the actual song itself, though? Did you decide on the topic before you wrote the song, or did you have the music sitting around and
wrote the music with Peter, our producer.
Okay.
The first time we wrote a song together, and him, you know, coming from, you know, Lindemann, Pain, Hypocrisy, those bands, and the harder side of things, it became a bit of a harder and very, very dark song. So as we
Yes.
were writing that song, I realized that this is the song, because
Yeah.
obviously, even though it's a very, very, you know, we're singing about a very courageous man, it would not have made sense at all to have a, you know, proud, uplifting song for the subject. You know?
especially, yeah. I wonder what he was like as a person, like personality-wise, because you don't. I mean, from the story, you.
But that's what they do so well. That is the thing they do so well, is they capture the feel of the subject, right? Like, it's a dark song, but it's an extremely dark subject. And even though you're more or less celebrating the man himself, the subject matter is still dark. What he went through was dark, and I feel like the song captures that so well.
You can see, okay, he's got a lot of dedication. But you meet someone on the street, you don't know if they're a dedicated type person or not. you know?
no.
So it would be really interesting. Well, that's your homework, guys, to go and put the song on and think of Witold Pilecki.
That's all for today. Thank you very much.
See you next time.
Okay, so that was the Sabaton history and the song Inmate 4859. Way darker than normal. But I like getting into this stuff. It's our history, right? Like, we like to think of some of these groups, some of these acts, some of these things as being done by other people. Evil things happening, being done by evil people. But they're human. They are human. They are the same thing that the rest of us are. And I think looking at them and portraying them as something different kind of closes us off to the reality that we very much have the ability to do things just as atrocious as this individually. And so I like talking about these things. I think it's very important to talk about these things and get a better understanding of them. And so I'm glad. This was probably one of my favorite Sabaton ones that I've done so far. Maybe my most favorite, with everything taken together. I really liked it. But yeah, with all that being said, as always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel. I'll put the link to the Discord in the comments down below. We can continue some of these conversations over there, or any other questions or things like that. I'll put it down there. Y'all can join and jump into the conversations whenever you want. But with all that being said, I'll see you all next time.